thank you for the invitation. I just wanted to address, before starting my presentation, the last question that was asked by one of the participants on whether the presence of Africa Corps is in some way impacting returnee reintegration programs. As far as I know, for Niger, which is the country that has probably the most developed of these programs, there hasn't been any impediment caused by Africa Corps. So I don't think that there is an impact that we are seeing at the moment. The programs are continuing as before, as during the Bazoum government. This doesn't mean that this will not change, but I don't think it's a big interest on the part of Africa Corps to interfere with the returnee programs. So I don't think those two are connected. So thank you. Marco, it would be lovely to have the slides on again. Thank you. So I will be speaking about something very niche, which is, so Riza gave us a great overview of what is happening in the Sahel, and Anna will be taking over from me to discuss also recommendations on what can be done with regard to Russian presence. I will do a bit of a zoom in on a specific subject, which is self-defense groups, and also, once again, to address one of the questions that was asked in terms of self-defense groups and meddling with the Africa Corps Russians. In Niger, again, there is no evidence that this is something that is happening. But again, I speak about Niger. So this presentation is taken from a paper that I wrote for SWP in Berlin, which focuses on this niche subject of two self-defense groups that have been operating in Niger. Officially, unofficially, it's mixed, and as I will explain in the presentation, is mixed for a number of reasons. So the first group is the Garde Nomade, which is an organization made up of mostly Tuareg fighters, which operates in Tawa, the region of Tawa, as you can see from the map, is the region in pink. And the Zankai in Tillabéri. Tillabéri is the region where the capital Niamey is situated. So to deal and all of this, so both these programs started within the Bazoum presidency. We all know that Niger has a long history of integration of former fighters into the army and into state structures. In the case of these two groups, the Bazoum government, before being ousted in July 2023, was behaving very differently. The difference was stark, even. And I will explain why. So next slide, please. So to deal with the escalating attacks by ISGS, the Islamic State in the region, and JNIM, Al-Qaeda in the region, in areas along the borders with Mali and with Burkina Faso, the government of Bazoum, again, right before its demise in 2023, had been pursuing a strategy that goes beyond military force. And so Riza talked of stabilization. This is precisely what was meant by the Nigerian government. Stabilization meant not just a military answer. And a series of initiatives which pertained to the reintegration of former combatants was coupled with dialogue and mediation strategies. And all of this was being hailed in Niger and outside Niger as profoundly innovative. So it was a big change. I mean, negotiation with Islamic State in the region was something that had never been seen before. So the pre-coup government, right before the military took power, had also begun to rely on these two self-defense groups, the Tawa Garde Nomade and the Zankai in Tillabéri. Now, the new transition government, the military junta, has inherited the self-defense group dossier, and it must find ways to maintain positive relations with the Garde Nomade, which is a group of heavily armed Tuareg operating in Tawa again, but also build ex novo relations with the Zankai, so this other group operating in Tillabéri, with whom the Bazoum government didn't have any relations. In the case of the Garde Nomade, and next slide, please, Marco. In the case of the Garde Nomade, the Bazoum government had kept a tight grip by retaining control through family ties. Most of the family of these combatants were based in Niamey, the family that had, of course, an influence over the administration. And the Bazoum government had promised them, and also maintained the promise, of integrating them into the ranks of the Garde Nationale, which is one of the FDS, the Defense and Security Forces of Niger. Bazoum wasn't just worried that the mobilization of these people would lead somewhere dangerous in terms of violence containment, but he was also concerned that not making any promises to a large group of armed Tuareg could lead to yet another rebellion, something that Niger knows very well, Niger and Mali d'ailleurs, or more ambitious demands for autonomy further down the line. So this explains the government's interest in co-opting, because co-optation is the key word here, in co-opting the Garde Nomade, which at the time, so when Bazoum started the program in 2021, consisted of about 500 Tuareg fighters, and having them join the formal ranks of the Garde Nationale. Again, I mean, it sounds like we're talking about something very small. Is 500 combatants, right? Is not that big a deal. But actually, these were the people, and again, this was the first promotion, there have been others, but these were the people that were most directly concerned with the violence. These are the actual fighters. And my PhD thesis specifically focuses on remote warfare, because in the case of the Sahel, and the Sahel is the case study, in the case of the Sahel, there are not many formal military people that are pushing themselves as far as the borders, in the case of Niger, with Mali and Burkina. So these areas are left unguarded, and the only people that are present are the Garde Nomade. Again, there's a lot of exceptions. There's other fighters as well, but the Nigerian military have been quite scared to be present in those areas. So speaking of the Zankai in Tillaberi, and their history is completely different, the Bazoum administration had preferred to ignore them, or he had been treating them with contempt in public by calling them simply militia. So there have been a few speeches where Bazoum just says, oh yeah, those militia. And their difference from the Garde Nomade is that, first of all, there are too many to precisely know who does what and where they do it. I'm quoting a sentence from one of the interviewees for this report. Anyone who has a gun can declare themselves allegiance to a self-defense group, but they tend to have some hierarchy, even small groups in small villages. So it is a galaxy of fighters. And most of them belong to the Zarma ethnic group. And so once again, the ethnic dimension is present. Secondly, they have very differently from the Garde Nomade, they have no military experience, but they train each other in basic military tactics. So these are not like the Garde Nomade fighters who were once in Libya, who know how to fight and who make their way back to Niger. They are trying to defend their villages from extremist groups, but they don't have the formal training that the Garde Nomade have. Thirdly, what is truly exceptional, what is really quite surprising about this group, is the discrepancy between the level of legitimacy they have in the villages that they protect, as opposed to the legitimacy of the regional and national administrations. So they are called militia groups, right, by the Bazoum administration, they were called. They were called vigilante committees, or Zankai, which in Zarma means our youth, in the villages where they're based. So this is quite huge a difference. Next slide, please. So thank you. So we know from experiences in Mali and in Burkina Faso how violence perpetrated by ethnic militias can become very rapidly self-perpetuating. Each incident pushes more civilians to join an armed group in order to obtain protection. So allowing a Zarma militia, and I'm speaking here specifically of the Zankai, to operate uncontrolled risks worsening already relations that are inter-ethnically very problematic. The terrain on which this transition government, this military government, treads right now is particularly shaky. And the Nigerian junta in power should not underestimate the Zankai, and it should invest more resources in bringing the militia group under some sort of state control, like they did with the Guard Nomad, creating, for example, a program that makes the Zankai accountable for their actions, and which, of course, I mean, has to offer something in return, right? And that could support a future professionalization of such a militia. This would allow for more control on the part of Niamey, but it would also mean admitting that such an ethnic-based group exists, which, of course, very few governments are happy to do. So this is all from me. I'm very happy to take any questions.